The other important group who initially suffered persecution and expulsion for their beliefs were the Roman Catholics. We know from the account of a Jesuit priest, Father Andrew White, who stopped at Barbados in 1634 on the way to Maryland, that he found some Catholics on the island, both English and Irish, among the first settlers. In this splendid book by Warren Alleyne, The History of St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Cathedral, Barbados, he tells us that a few years later, a priest was arrested and tried on a charge of dispersing popish books and seducing the people and delivering scandalous words about the bishops in England. And Professor Jerome Handler transcribed for the Museum Journal the work of Father Antoine Billet, a Catholic priest who came from Suriname in 1654 among a party of other Frenchmen, recorded that there were Catholics here, quote, not small in numbers, unquote. They would have been mostly Irish indentured servants, Barbados by Oliver Cromwell, several thousand of them, after his massacre of the Irish in 1652 at Drogheda. Research by Monsignor Winston, more familiarly known to Bajans as Father Harcourt Blackett, tells us that Franciscan friars were transported here under Cromwell's regime, possibly giving rise to the name Friars Well in St. Lucy. But Catholic priests especially were abhorred, denied entry to the island, and if found, promptly banished, and no Catholic could hold public office. The last Catholic English sovereign was James II, and during his reign the Bajan authorities were forced to tolerate a Jesuit priest from Martinique. But when James was deposed in 1688, his two most important converts, the Attorney General and William Chamberlain, an MP, were both arrested and put in prison. The Attorney General was shipped back to Britain, labelled as a piece of cargo, and Chamberlain was forced to recant. Warren Alleyne's history notes only 3 transient priests until 1839. In 1819, a Catholic bishop was sent to Trinidad to serve the British West Indies and British Guyana, and a Catholic committee in Barbados, representing some 300 Catholics, petitioned the bishop for a local priest, pledging a salary of £400. A Reverend William Rogers from British Guyana was appointed, with the blessing of the governor, on March the 2nd, 1839. He set to work to get a church built. Funds were raised, and a site of 1.2 acres here on the corner of Gemmett's Lane was bought from a Mrs. Mary Walcott for £1,500. That would buy about 100 square feet of land today, just enough space to park the priest's car. The church was designed by Major Richard Hort of the 81st Regiment, who later designed the Bethel Methodist Church. Many donations came from members of the Irish Regiment, and so the church was dedicated to St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland, and it was blessed on the feast of St. Patrick, March the 17th, 1848. This photo shows the old church and the original long-demolished presbytery. Unfortunately, on Trinity Sunday, June the 17th, 1897, a fire destroyed this church completely. Arson was suspected, a possible indication of the lingering opposition to Catholics. A new priest, Father Hogan, set about raising funds to rebuild, and they came from all quarters, the government, people of all religions, including some from the Jews, and our generous, oil-rich friends in Trinidad, to whom we always turn. Mr. Caesar Castellani, an architect from Guyana, designed the much larger St. Patrick's that we see today, built for £4,000, which would barely fit out a modest modern kitchen today. It was built with great speed and reopened a mere 1 year later with a Mass again on St. Patrick's Day, March 17, 1899. And coincidentally, the script for this episode was also completed on St. Patrick's Day this year. St. Patrick's can justify claim to be one of our most beautiful churches, built with local coral stone blocks mined from the Pine, Britain's Hill, and St. George quarries. It's late neo-Gothic, with the quintessential pointed windows and doors, the belfry and the buttresses, with perhaps the most beautiful interior of all in Barbados. It's more than 100 feet long, with a sanctuary arch 40 feet high at the apex and built of red Aberdeen granite. Perhaps the most striking feature is this magnificent hammer beam ceiling, while the combination of majestic columns on each side, very tall windows and quatrefoil windows at the upper level provide a splendid sense of height, space, and light. The beautiful high altar was installed in 1902, along with a stained glass window representing the coronation of the Virgin Mary and a communion rail, all the gifts of Mr. and Mrs. William Horne of the splendid old mansion Lirius. Other additions were the Stations of the Cross and the shields depicting badges of regiments stationed in Barbados, a reminder of the close association of St. Patrick's with British soldiers. When all debts were paid, the church was consecrated on August the 23rd, 1903, almost 110 years ago, in a marathon ceremony of 5 hours. There are many other beautiful features in St. Patrick's, well worth attention, including the beautiful side altars of the Sacred Heart and of Our Lady, and paintings installed by the famous Jesuit priest Father Bizon earlier in the last century. Here is Christ crucified, and St. Peter Slaver, slave of slaves forever, it says, while this one was stolen by a Philistine a couple of years ago. Perhaps it symbolized the emptiness of a life without God. An especially interesting monument is the memorial to Josephine Parvacino, who would have been the aunt of our Nick and Bob Parvacino, but who was a victim of the eruption of Montpellier in Martinique on May the 8th, 1902. The story is that Josephine was attending a convent at Saint-Pierre to perfect her French. Her father, the Italian consul to Barbados, went and searched and found her body and had to bury her there, but brought back fragments from the house where she stayed and placed them in a memorial on the north wall, the fragments of a Pieta. On March the 18th, 1970, St. Patrick's was raised to the status of a cathedral, and on January the 29th, 1971, the Right Reverend Anthony Dixon was consecrated Bishop of the new Diocese of Bridgetown and Kingston. They have just celebrated the 165th anniversary of the consecration of the first church, and this splendid painting by Bayesian artist Coral Bernardine, commissioned and informed by Monsignor Vincent, tells the fascinating history of Catholicism in Barbados, from the days of secret worship in caves in the north, the burning church and the new cathedral, and the lion at Gun Hill carved by Captain Wilkinson, believed to be a Catholic because the psalm quoted is in Latin.
And I think it's more than believe because of the psalm quoted in Latin. At that time, there were many soldiers out at Gun Hill. I have come across in our registers persons out there. So the priests would go out there and celebrate the sacraments for them. I came across a Madden, Joseph Madden, who was out there. And how I did manage to come across him because there was someone from England, I believe, who was looking for their roots in Barbados and discovered that here was this Joseph Madden that she was looking for, and he was out there at Gun Hill. But that is part of the history of the Catholic Church in Barbados. As we all know, the Catholic Church for many years was excluded from public worship and public office in Barbados. And so the Catholics worship in caves, and especially in the north of the island. Practically any cave you came across in the north, you could almost say that this is where they worship, because the Irish were very strong, the presence of the Irish and the Scottish in the north of the island, the name of places, etc. And the painting here done by Coral Bernardine is done to reflect that for two reasons. One, this is the year of faith, and each parish on the island was given a piece of canvas to depict something that would represent that year of faith. And secondly, this is the 165th anniversary of St. Patrick's, the consecration of St. Patrick's. So I thought if I combined the two, and I asked Coral Bernardine, who's an extraordinary artist, to put this together.
Efforts over the years to establish a school were frustrated at every level, and it was not until 1932 that the present St. Patrick's Primary School opened under Mother Angela Woods, quote, with 7 scholars, a few books, no money, but lots of faith. The Ursuline Convent School for Girls was a different story. It was a private school from the start in 1894, with fees of $12 a term and a curriculum similar to that of Queen's College. It soon became a great success, and it moved here in 1901 to the impressive and historic House Linden, built by Thomas Henry Stokes, a merchant owner of Harrison's on Broad Street, around 1870. The school now covers almost the length of Lower Cullimer Rock and has its own chapel and a grotto of Our Lady of Lourdes. Many of the nuns were legendary, including Mother Sacred Heart, the daughter of the famous Mr. Dalton, headmaster of Harrison College and a convert to Catholicism, while my Aunt Lucille was their first lay teacher in the 1930s, teaching art and English. The Catholic community of Barbados has expanded over the last 50 to 60 years, largely as a result of our cosmopolitan society and emigration from Trinidad, Guyana, and St. Lucia. Other churches now cover the island, from Our Lady of the Rosary at Verdun in St. John, partly a gift of the Chatelaine of Verdun, the first Mrs. Norman Simpson, to Our Lady of Sorrows at Ashton Hall, St. Peter in the north, where the Sisters of the Sorrowful Mother established the St. Joseph's Hospital. Our Lady, Queen of the Universe of Blackrock, caters to northern Bridgetown, while the new In the Round Church of St. Dominic's at Maxwell's in Christchurch celebrated 40 years on March the 26th this year. An old cinema became the St. Francis of Assisi at Mount Standfast in St. James, which must now resonate wonderfully with the election of the new Pope Francis, Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio of Argentina, a pope we might well call the Pope of Hope. It has been said that St. Francis of Assisi was passing by the church of St. Damiana in Assisi, which was old and then near to collapse. Inspired, he went in to pray and was filled with fervor. He heard the voice of Christ from the cross telling him, "Francis, go and repair my house, which as you see is falling into ruins." St. Francis did just that and went on to work to restore the Church of Rome as a whole. And while the Church is facing many challenges, here at home we've seen new growth too. The Living Water community came here from Trinidad 10 years ago, and with the generous gift of 10 acres of land in St. David's Village, now provides a rich pastoral service and community outreach, with a food bank for the needy and hot meals served in Heroes Square on Tuesday evenings at 6. And the very latest outreach is the Church of the Sacred Heart in St. Philip, to serve that rapidly growing town of 6 roads. And so we see the power of faith against persecution in both of these communities, the Jews and the Catholics. We've seen Jews reaching out to Catholics. We've seen a cathedral rise like a phoenix from the ashes and a synagogue restored, all with faith, funds and sacrifice. And we've all just witnessed 2 billion Christians, more than 1 billion Catholics, responding to a new Pope, Pope Francis, a Pope of hope, humility, charity and reconciliation. So it's only fitting to close with a part of the prayer of Saint Francis of Assisi. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me show love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. Join us again next week for the final episode of Pillars of Worship.